Okay, welcome everybody to this afternoon's Paraboss webinar. Paraboss, for those of you who are new to us, are Australia's resource for the control of worms, lice, flies and ticks. And it is a joint initiative of Australian Wool Innovation, Meat and Livestock Australia, the University of New England and Animal Health Australia. For those who I haven't met, my name is Fiona MacArthur and I am a member of the Paraboss Extension team. If you are new to Paraboss, or if you haven't been on for a little while, you may have noticed if you hop online that it all looks a little bit new. Well, that's because part of the Paraboss relaunch has been to put up a new website. There's been a lot of people working really hard behind the scenes, so I encourage you to all hop on the new Paraboss website and have a look around. You'll find it really user-friendly, and it should be your one-stop shop for all your parasite information on sheep, cattle and goats. So today we are going to be looking at gaining the upper hand on sheep blowflies this season and into the future. It's a very topical webinar right at this moment, with the temperatures warming up and rainfall really widespread across our country. We are going to have a lot of sheep blowflies this year. We're really excited today to be joined by Megan Rogers, who is actually the lead on the Paraboss Extension team. So it's wonderful to have her here. Megan also has her own agricultural consulting company as well, Megan Rogers Consulting, and works on a number of industry-based programs. She also lives out at Forbes with her husband, and they have a property and farm out there. Welcome to today's Paraboss presentation. I would now like to invite Megan to share her screen. I'll stop sharing mine and we'll get Megan's up. There we go. I have Megan's screen up now, so I'll hand you over to Megan, and I hope you all enjoy the presentation, and I'll be looking out for your questions in the Q&A tab. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Fiona, and hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. It's a different role for me this month, delivering the presentation. So I just wanted to acknowledge the collaborative nature of the content that you're going to see today. Australian Wool Innovation have been rolling out their new flystrike management extension program, and so what you're going to see today is part of what you'll see if you attend one of their workshops, which are being run out throughout all of the AWI extension networks across Australia. So I guess with the ongoing rain and flooding conditions, and certainly our thoughts go out to all of those who are affected by flooding in so many areas. It's really a bit rare to not hear of flooding in so many areas at the moment. So certainly with the amount of weather pressure we're getting, we think that this type of content that you're going to hear today is really important, but also really important to think a little bit about strategic and tactical. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And I'm going to give you a lot of links and signposts to go to some other resources. So while we're thinking a little bit about flies, so it's very easy for us to think about what the biggest issues regarding fly strike management are on our property, and that being the flies. But what are we doing, how, rather than just thinking about what they are in terms of fly strike, what are the issues that are predisposing your animals to the fly strike that you're experiencing? And indeed, locally, it might be the weather conditions. What do you know about fly strike? And I think it's a really important question that we ask ourselves, and we think a little bit deeper into what it is about fly strike that causes it, what starts it off, and can you learn more? And what can you do about it on your own property this season and into the future and with other seasons? So we're going to talk about a lot of this seasonal type management, but we'll also talk about what we can start to do and plans to put in place to help further improve our, decrease our susceptibility to fly strike. So no secrets here. Fly strike is found on, in various parts of the sheep, and we know that it's caused by the maggots, laid by Lucilia caprina. Might either be a covert strike, which is one that's really hard to pick up. Sometimes they resolve themselves. Other times they don't, and they'll turn into an early detectable, which is that dark area of wool, and become an advanced strike if it's not picked up early. Quite importantly, fly strike is a costly part of our industry, which is why there's such significant investment into this space. And if we think about the $96 million for prevention and treatment costs nationally, the $227 million worth of production losses, which equates to about $4.76 per head. And that's not even costing the pain and suffering that's incurred in terms of our livestock. As I said, the culprit for fly strike is the Australian sheep blowfly, Lucilia caprina. And I think it's really important that we think about the life cycle of that fly in the way that we deal with the way that we're managing on farm to decrease the impact. So we've got sorry, my mouse is a little bit, I think I'll just move my mouse out of the road. We've got a situation here with the first 5 days where the eggs are laid on susceptible sheep. Maggots emerge, then they go through 2 molts while they're still on the sheep, and then they'll drop off the sheep after 5 days. They'll become a pre-pupa and then go into the soil, where the pupa emerges when the temperature is, importantly, above 15 degrees Celsius. So depending on where you are in Australia, you may or may not be experiencing soil temperatures that are conducive to sheep fly strike. And that's really important. Once the soil temperature reaches that 15 degrees, which is a critical temperature, the immature fly will emerge. And then in about 5 or 6 days from emerging, that fly can then lay eggs back on your animals. So it's a pretty quick turnaround once the conditions are right. Here's just a little visual of the different life stages of the Australian sheep blowfly, with the tiny maggots on the left, the 2 medium-sized ones, and here's our pre-pupa and the pupa, and this is the one that comes out that hatches into the fly. The female blowfly is a little bit larger than the male blowfly. The male one's a little bit longer and skinnier, and he's got a more pointy tail, if you like. Now, this triangle that we've got here is something that I'm going to refer to on a number of occasions during today's presentation, and it's something that I think is really important about the way that we think in terms of managing our blowfly strike. And there are 3 conditions that are essential for fly strike to occur, and that's the presence of susceptible sheep. And I know it sounds very obvious, but stick with us on this: the presence of flies and favourable weather conditions. And I guess our role as managers is to try and decrease the susceptibility of sheep, decrease the number or the conditions, the weather conditions for the flies, or the presence of the flies by decreasing the number of flies on our place. But it can be complicated. It seems a bit simple, but it can be complicated. And AWI have put together a causal web of the factors that give rise to sheep blowfly strike. And whilst specifically breech strike, which you can see that large green dot on the right-hand side, I don't want you to worry too much about what a lot of that is there. But the purpose of me showing this today, normally in a SimpliFly workshop, we talk a little bit about it for a period of time, but we don't have time in today's webinar. But the purpose of keeping this in today's presentation is to merely demonstrate how complicated and how many factors go into sheep blowfly strike in terms of, we've got over here, we've got rainfall, ecosystem, we've got the season, we've got the sheep odour, sheep behaviour. Over to the left, we've got the age, whether or not an animal's mulesed or not. What we've got here, which the dark blue ones, dots, are very much what we can impact. So we can impact on our farm management and nutrition, breech skin wrinkle, breech wool cover, crutching, shearing, the application of sheep insecticide, what sort of stain situation we've got, and DAG. So quite complicated, yes. But I guess our role as managers is to try and work through and break as many of those linkages as possible and decrease the overall impact and susceptibility of our animals. Okay, so remember, it's those three. It's the presence of the sheep, presence of the flies, and the favourable weather conditions. And we want to be trying to disrupt that as much as we can for the sheep blowfly. So the first of those three essential conditions required is the weather. So we want the soil temperature above 15 degrees, as I said earlier, and the ambient temperature 17 to 38. So here locally, I don't know what the soil temperature is. I didn't look that up, but certainly ambient temperatures here at Forbes are, well in the within the range of 17 to 38. So I think it's going to get to 21 today. So our overnight temperature has been quite mild. So that's certainly something that I'm looking at, sort of going, well, the season's upon us. Wet, regular and consistent rainfall being a high risk. Yep, tick. That's, something, I guess it's worth noting here, a single large rainfall event on its own is not necessarily going to give rise to the right weather conditions. However, ongoing conditions like what much of the east and areas everywhere are experiencing certainly is favourable for flies. And then the wind speed. So they don't like it windy, a bit like the rest of us. We don't like it when it's too windy ourselves outside. And same sort of thing with the flies, under 9 kilometres an hour, and they certainly, they're grounded and seeking shelter, particularly over 30 kilometres per hour. So again, having a think a little bit about that might be something that we come back to in terms of what strategies you might employ in reducing the susceptibility and the environment for those for the flies. Our susceptible sheep might have one or more of any of the factors here in this slide, whether it's wounds, previous strike dermatitis, yellow wool fleece rot, breech wrinkle, DAG, long wool, urine stain. All of those factors there are, and animals might have one or a number: adhered after birth, horns, sweaty poles, urine stain, moist woolen skin. So again, that's, really thinking a little bit about what it is that our sheep are displaying, what sort of characteristics they're displaying that may in fact be making them a little bit more susceptible. Other risk factors include conformation, the structure of the animal and tail length, and we'll talk about that a bit later as well in a bit more detail. Age and management. We all are no doubt aware that our younger animals are more susceptible to sheep blowfly strike than our mature animals. Classed versus unclassed and cull sheep. Unclassed and cull sheep are, quite likely to be classed out, the cull sheep are classed out quite often around some structural or fleece rot type characteristics. And we see for people that are purchasing merinos for first cross ewe production, for example, they have an inherent, not always, but sometimes have an inherent higher propensity to have fleece rot. So again, thinking a little bit about those type of characteristics with your animals, and that's not the end of the world, having a higher incidence of fleece rot. If you're buying those animals, it's about understanding and managing them. Used with different lambing or crutching and shearing dates are important as well. So if you are a trading operation, thinking about what you've got in terms of wool length, but importantly when you're putting your lambing or crutching and shearing dates together. And protracted lambing periods, again, particularly if you're spring lambing at the moment, if you've got an extended lambing period, that's going to delay marking and any preventative application, preventative chemical application. So I'm just going to scoot through a couple of the next slides fairly quickly. These charts come out of the Visual Sheep Scoring Guide, which is an AWI MLA publication. Obviously, lower risk being lower score and higher risk being higher score on the right-hand side for breech wrinkle and breech cover. DAGs, again, lower to higher, urine stain, lower to higher. So there's ways and means of going about scoring animals if you're looking to benchmark your flock, and importantly, look to keep a record of any progress that you're making. Same scenario with wool, colour and fleece rot. We talked about structure a couple of slides back, again, thinking about what the conformation around shoulders and backs with regards to body strike as well. So important considerations when you're making decisions about which animals to keep. And that's just a cover of the Visual Sheep Score Guide. Our third and final factor that's required for the for sheep blowfly strike is the presence of flies, and you need adult flies ready to breed, and they need a source of protein to become ready to reproduce, but also for the maggots to feed on once they hatch. So we're thinking a little bit about the riskier times of the year for fly strike on your property. We really need to think about overall how that season and our seasonal conditions and our general rainfall patterns and temperature patterns impact on our operation. So I've put together 2 screenshots from the FlyBoss fly risk tool. It's a simulator which looks at average rainfall and climate conditions in various areas, and you can hone in on your particular area and it'll go to the nearest weather station. So I've put a Katanning one in here, and if you have a look, September's when things start to become a bit more busy for the fly, and we have a bit of a dip off over the warmer months in summer, and then it comes back in autumn again, and then back over the winter. If you're in Walker, the shape of the curve is markedly different. So the season doesn't really start until mid-September as things start to warm up, and then it peters off again in May, and it's really quite low over those winter months. I just should also mention that that's for all types of sheep, and it's a relative strike risk. So do that for your own property, and you can choose what class of animals. You can also factor into that tool whether you're mulesed, unmulesed. You can put treatments on. You can put when you're doing your shearing and crutching, as well as what particular preventative chemicals that you want to put on those animals, and that will then give you an idea of the impact of the management that you're putting around those sheep. So the next question that I pose is, what does effective fly strike management need to consider? And again, coming back to the presence of the susceptible sheep, the presence of the flies and the favourable weather conditions, it means that we need to think about reducing that, either the susceptibility or the number of susceptible sheep in our mob or our flock. We want to think about restricting fly populations on our farm and limiting the impact of weather conditions. And there are steps that we can take on farm to do that. But it's really important to understand, in the context of today's presentation, that number one, we want to know a little bit about our flies, but you have a unique risk profile. And that's a really important part of today's presentation, that you're not necessarily going to have the same conditions, same sheep. You know, what happens on your place is really relevant to your place. Prevention is better than cure. Chasing around after animals during a fly wave that are struck is not an advisable, or it's not something that we want to be doing for a whole host of reasons. And also avoiding panic with good preparation. So knowing that you've got some bad weather ahead, that's going to put a bit of pressure on either the sheep, and the timing of when you want to start putting some preventative products on, but also when did you last apply your product, or when did you apply the product, and you need to be keeping a fairly vigilant eye on those animals, particularly depending on the amount of rain that's falling and the intensity of the rain. And really importantly, the fourth little part of that puzzle is to use a range of tools that are available to you. And that's really important. We've got to think about an integrated pest management approach and trying to, number one, decrease the number and the relative susceptibility of our animals through our management and our selection. We want to be using a good chemical regime, and we also want to be trying to minimise the amount of the impact from the weather. So again, we've got this integrated approach that we want to be thinking about in both long and short term. So in our long term, we need to be thinking about removing susceptible sheep from our flock. So identifying them and then removing them, or having a plan in place to remove them depending on the numbers and what sort of other circumstances are impacting on your business at the time. We want to reduce the impact of favourable weather. That seems, how do we do that? There's ways and means that we can do that. And we want to restrict fly populations. Okay, so we don't want the flies to get out of control, but how we manage struck animals and animals that are impacted by flies on farm can reduce the overall population locally. One thing that we do know is that the sheep blowfly does not travel very far. It's got a flying radius of about 3 k's. So that's really important when you're thinking about the fact that what happens on your farm, or if you're closely settled, neighbouring properties can be giving rise to an ongoing population. So if you're surrounded by cropping properties and you're the only sheep place, then what's happening on your place is largely going to be, coming back, year on year from what's happening on your place. Whereas if you've got lots and lots of sheep and you're a closely settled sheep district, then, depending on how big the holdings are, you may well be being impacted by other people's management as well. So thinking about the fly population and what you might be able to do to reduce that on your farm is an important tool, both now but also in the longer term. So our short-term tactical activities might be they're things like our prevention activities. So that's application of chemical. It might be when you do your shearing and crutching, treatment of struck sheep, how you treat them, and what you do with the treated wool and the management of those animals, and also crisis management. And I'd probably put a / crisis aversion as well, trying to avert a crisis before it becomes a crisis. So what tools can you use in fly strike management? And there's a whole heap of them. There's broadly speaking, there's 8 here on this slide, which is monitoring. We do have to continue to monitor our sheep. The idea of treating them and then not following up with ongoing monitoring is particularly when we've got heavy pressure from the rain and washout, but also, flies wanting to get going and proliferate. We really need to keep the monitoring up. Crutching and shearing is another important tool, as I said, as well as the role of preventative chemicals and how we manage scouring, dags and stain within our animals. We've also got things like the way that we select our paddock, which paddocks we're putting our animals into, and particularly which animals are going into which paddocks. There might be some paddocks that we can, keep for our younger, more susceptible animals, which might be, less favourable for lambing because they might be a bit more windy, for example. However, they would better suit the younger, more susceptible weaners, for example. Reducing fly populations is another part of this toolbox. Classing, selection and joining, and how we're selecting sires and within flock selection of our breeding years, as well as breech modification. Again, what are we monitoring? We're monitoring those 3 things. We're monitoring the sheep, we're monitoring the fly populations, and we're monitoring weather conditions. There's a pattern here in terms of the repetition of that triangle. It's really, really important to think about the sheep, the fly, the weather, and what we can do, again, to disrupt that for either any of the sides on that triangle. The more of those that we can disrupt, the less impact we're going to have from the flies. So short-term tactical tools, crutching and shearing. So it's quite interesting we can expect 6 weeks from crutching or shearing. However, if you've got a significant scouring issue, then that can be reduced to as few as 3 weeks. Thinking about the high risk periods and wherever you might be, and the reason for shearing when you do shear, timing is really critical, and it can form a really important tool. It can be a really important tool in reducing your overall susceptibility to flies, just by choosing a different time of the year to do those key management interventions. Our preventative chemicals, most people would be aware that there's a few of those on the market, and they're really a short-term tactical tool. They provide from anywhere from 4 to 29 weeks protection. That's as stated on the labels. They mostly affect the fly's nervous system. They are residual but do wear off. Timing is important, and effective chemical application is essential. Okay, so notice at that top point there is a bit of an approximate type symbol. That's, the labels will say up to, and that's something that's really important to consider. If you've applied a product and you are unlucky enough to be under, this coming week's amount of rain that falls within a really short period of time, then there's going to be washout occur with the products that you apply. So you need to understand that you can't have that level of rainfall on your animals with those products on and expect that full period of protection. So really importantly is to apply the product effectively and appropriately. So the first thing you need to do is select the right chemical for the job. Now, that right chemical for the job is, could be, the right thing for one person might be the right thing for a different person, or another person has a different chemical. Okay, so product selection is really important. The application method is really important as well, and to follow the label and use the appropriate method of application. Apply at the right dosage. I know it sounds pretty basic and pretty obvious, but it's really important that you do understand how much your animals weigh. If you don't have some scales, I would strongly recommend that you invest in some scales to have a more accurate understanding of what the weight of your animals are, and therefore apply the right dosage. Apply it for the appropriate wool length. So some products are for longer wool, some products are for shorter wool. And it's really important that you understand that and you apply the product as it is intended. And again, read and follow the label instructions. I can't stress that enough. It's really important that you understand what is on the label and what is contained on that label that's important to managing flies on your own place. So in the SimpliFly workshops, participants go through and have a look at, they go through an exercise and look at chemical labels and the different components on the chemical labels, which particularly apply to managing fly strike. So some of the abbreviations and what the label says and what the labels claim and the products claim that they can do. So it's really important to understand that. Of course, wearing PPE, checking intervals, keeping the records, and using and attending a chemical users training is also part of that effective chemical application. This chart here, I don't want to spend a lot of time on it because the next slide complements this as well, but you need to understand the groups that your preventative chemicals are from. So there are different groups. So there are, there are organophosphates or OPs. There are synthetic pyrethroids or SPs. Okay, so diazinon being an organophosphate that we're all familiar with. Synthetic pyrethroids, which is alpha cypermethrin. That's registered for body strike only as a poron. The neonicotinoids, imidacloprid. Okay. Spinosins, which is spinosad. So again, the little shields here say indicate where you can use those. So you can use that as a jetting or a dressing. The MLs, macrocyclic lactones, or ivermectin is the active chemical. Again, they're available for jetting and dressing. And again, over on this far right, you can see what the period of protection, as stated on the label, is. Okay, so 4 to 6 weeks preventative for spinosad, or for ivermectin up to 12 weeks in low to moderate fly pressure. So understanding that's really important. Then our insect growth regulators, our ceramazine and our dicyclonal, and here's what they're available for application, the different application methods, whether you've got a pour on or spray on, up to 11 or 14 or 11 to 29 weeks based on the strength. Okay, these little exclamation marks, these little cautionary triangles over here indicate that these products are also used for lice control. And that's a really important part in helping you manage your on-farm chemical resistance. Okay, so that's another factor that you need to consider when you're choosing. I'll just go back one. When you're selecting the right chemical for the job, thinking a bit about what's going on in other pest management operations on your place as well. So available at available at wool.com is this guide to treating with chemicals, which covers all of that what was in that previous slide. It's also got withholding and export slaughter intervals, sheep rehandle interval, and wool handling interval on there. Okay, they're really important things to know as well in terms of when you can start rehandling those animals. So, for example, organophosphate, diazinon, the sheep rehandle interval here is 42 days. Okay, that's when you can rehandle those animals. The wool handling interval is 60 days. The withholding period, 14, and the export slaughter interval is 21. So understand what those abbreviations mean on the labels and use those to your best advantage as well. Okay, so we've got quite varying wool harvesting intervals and sheep rehandle intervals with different chemicals across the range of products available. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about chemical resistance. And first and foremost, some chemical groups are no longer as effective. And we know that. There's certainly been there's been some studies done in the last couple of years looking at the resistance that's taking place. There's certainly been a lot of pressure placed on chemicals environmentally, and the weather and the environment for the flies to proliferate. It's meant that we're putting our products under more pressure. So quite importantly, we need to start thinking about rotating and using different chemical groups. We can't be using the same ones year in, year out, or more than one time during the one season and expecting those products to last. And quite importantly, diazinon and the IGRs are the ones that are showing up as having the a higher level of resistance, and again these are lice chemicals as well, hence the triangle. Our SPs have shown up to be less effective as well. Quite importantly, different product names doesn't mean it's a different chemical group. So a lot of these actives are now off patent. So we're getting generic formulations and generic brands coming through, which are the same active ingredients, not always the same concentration. So again, it's oils ain't oils, and apples aren't always being compared with apples. So you need to read the label. I can't emphasize that near enough. So how do you know you've got resistance? So an indicator of resistance would be shortening of the protective period. That's, less than what's being specified on the product labels. Okay. And that's really important. Fly strike in multiple sheep. So if you're just getting one or two that are getting struck, that would sort of cause you to ask the question, have I applied or not applied it to those animals? But if you're getting multiple sheep that have been treated with the same chemical, then that would be giving you an indication of resistance, okay? But really, really importantly, for anything that you're using on your place, it doesn't mean that they've totally lost effectiveness, rather than your protective period can be less than what's previously expected or stated on the label. So, you know, if you have got some emerging resistance, it's not the end of the world. You've got to still think about how you can tactically use that tool in your suite of tools in your integrated pest management to try and keep the flies under control. But do not set and forget. Do not apply it and then go, oh, well, I can come back in 6, 8, however many weeks and expect everything to be sailing along nicely. You need to continue and monitor those animals. As I said earlier, the protective period can be reduced with the application method if it's not applied correctly, the amount of rain that falls after application, and also how soon after it's applied, the degree of fly pressure, so how much how much pressure the product's being placed under, as well as the development of resistance. So if you do suspect that you've got some resistance in your mobs, you really need to go where they treated. So again, is it one or a couple of animals in your mob, or is it throughout the mob? Is it, you know, quite a number? Was the chemical applied following the label instructions? Did DAGs make penetration of the product difficult? That's another thing to consider, because certainly getting the product to where it needs to be working, if you've got a high DAG environment, is going to be a lot more difficult. So the product's just not getting to where it needs to be. And again, was there heavy or persistent rain following treatment? In terms of limiting or preventing it on your own place, if you've got resistance, then you really want to try and work around what you've got to try and limit further, the development of further resistance. So that might be, you know, use of different products, different application methods, adjusting when you're shearing or crutching, some of those kind of management implications or management interventions. However, if you don't have chemical resistance and you're not aware of it, then you really want to maintain that. And again, the same rules apply. Using different products, rotating your chemicals, understanding when your risk periods are, and, you know, not overusing products where you don't need to. As I said a little bit earlier, integrated pest management is really important, and using as many of those tools as you can in an integrated way to try and, you know, manage the onset of resistance, or if you've got resistance, try and minimise the impact of chemical resistance. And this comes about from knowing which chemical groups you've got and rotating wherever possible. Optimise the number and timing of treatments. Okay, that's really important, and not using back-to-back, the same product back-to-back. Follow the label instructions and keep records. Monitor fly strike and kill maggots. Killing maggots is really quite important in terms, particularly if you're under a fair bit of pressure and you've got plenty of flies around, by clipping that wool and putting it in a plastic bag and cooking those by leaving the bag sealed in and in the sun is a way of stopping those maggots from going down into the soil, which comes back to why we need to know a little bit about how flies work. Stops them pupating, going back into the soil and starting the life cycle again. So there's some simple things here that we can do, which will just inherently bring the population of our flies on farm down. Thinking about our considerations for chemical rotation, again, what did we apply last time, whether that's earlier in the season or last year? Avoid using a chemical from the same group, okay? Now, understanding what the chemical groups are is just such an important part of that. And, you know, knowing that the difference between some of our insect growth regulators are not, they're in the same group, but they've got different names, but they're in the same group, no question. So understanding that and using that information is really important in making sure that we're rotating. So effective rotation hasn't got to do with different labels, different chemical drums. It's got to do with different groups. Okay, so Can't rely on the fact that you've got a different named product this year to what you had last year. It may just be a different generic of the same product. Okay, lice control. Again, what are you using for management of lice, and not using the same groups for flystrike? Okay. And again, what are we using to treat and during the, like for wounds? Okay, treating struck sheep, and avoid using those. And this wheel's available online, but you can also get hard copies either at one of the SimpliFly workshops, or you can request them. They're available at field days and other things. AWI have produced quite a number of them. But this wheel is these little coloured strips rotate around, and so the aim of using this wheel is to not have the same colour in any of these 4 sections. So whether what you're using as a dressing, a lice treatment, and the first and second preventative, not having the same colour in the in that wedge at all. Okay, so again, the little instructions here talk about how to work that, but once you sort of have a bit of a play with it, move those things around, it's really quite a nice way of working that out. And particularly, I think one important area is dressing, like what your fly dressing is, and what you use there by comparison with what some of the other preventers and your lice treatments are. So you can really make some headway there in just helping to minimise the impact of using the same groups and getting more resistance and putting more pressure on the system. Really quite important in managing scouring, dags and stain, and the fact that the scouring, dags and stain just creates ideal conditions to attract flies and for the eggs to hatch. So the breech stays moist and warm. Okay, so that might be something, along the lines of, not crutching on time. Scouring could be, parasites, bacteria, nutrition, the contributing factors and your short-term strategies. Again, thinking about what's causing the scouring. Is the scouring caused by internal parasites, or is it caused by some nutritional imbalance? Okay, so thinking a bit about what's going on there, what your contributing factors are. Again, the sensitivity to parasites and the age of the animals do play a contribution into how much scouring there is. Worm Boss is where you can find information about better managing or optimum management of worms and control of worms on farm, and how to manage your animals, manage your pastures, decrease the risk, worm risk there as well, which inherently will reduce your the amount of dag formation with scour worms. I said earlier on that we would come back to look at tail length, and tail length is really important because overly short tails increase the risk of dag formation and stain. The breech area is a really important area in terms of the drainage and just how wet that is. A short tail gives rise to more splashing when the sheep urinates, or you can get more dag form there as well. So again, 3 palpable joints is the recommendation, and that then comes to the tip of the vulva and you use. Short tails also increase the risk of bacterial and joint infections such as arthritis, rectal prolapse, and cancers. So again, the 3rd or the 4th joint is the recommendation, and that's really important. It's certainly, you do see it occasionally with animals with excessively short tails. They get the rectal prolapse and cancers. They might get extra arthritis, but you also do see some breech strike running back up their backs. So when I said a little while ago about paddock selection and helping manage fly strike in that regard, we know that open paddocks with more breeze are are less favourable for flies, less timber and wet areas. And I know that's a real challenge at the moment. And we've got people with really wet pasture conditions in so many areas. And low worm risk pastures will also help, because that will help bring down the amount of scouring within the paddocks as well. So thinking about how you might be setting up your pastures for the worm risk is really important, but also your animals which might be open with more wind, less timber, etc., mightn't be, you know, overly favourable for lambing, but that's a whole lot better place for your young animals to be, which are more susceptible to flies. But the paddock is not quite as favourable for the flies as well. So that's again just using that triangle to your best advantage to try and disrupt the the ideal conditions for those flies and for fly strike to occur. So use the behaviour and life cycle to your advantage on farm. As I said, collect and bag your maggots when you're treating your struck sheep. Remove sources of protein where possible. I haven't touched on that a lot. It's quite important to understand which flies are on your animals, particularly secondary and non-sheep blowfly ones. So if the animals have died from sheep blowfly strike, we need to think about those animals and how we can remove those extra sources of protein. So what we do with carcasses on our farm is an important part of that space. And again, I don't have time to go into all of these points in too greater detail. Killing maggots by leaving those bags in the sun when you are collecting and bagging those maggots with your animals that have been struck is a simple and effective way of helping stop those animals pupating in the ground. So in a more long-term type of strategy, we think about classing and selection. Now, I don't want you to spend too much time trying to decipher this chart, but the key point is, if you purchase a ram, this black square here, if you purchase a ram this year and you join him 4 times, 1, 2, 3, 4 times, then you're still going to have animals 16 years later with 25% of his DNA. Okay? So when you're thinking about reducing your overall susceptibility, what you do this year is still 16 years later very much impacted in your flock. So I don't want to spend too much time on that, aside from the fact that it is, what you do this year has got long-term impacts in your breeding and overall susceptibility. So traits you would want or might want to retain to help minimise the susceptibility would be low body and breech wrinkle, short and minimal breech wool cover, white wool colour, no fleece rot, dermatitis, low scouring and dags, low worm egg counts, polled animals, no previous fly strike wounds, good conformation and structure. Okay, so there's plenty to do there, and there's plenty of opportunities to be selecting. But again, finding that happy medium is really important. So it's also really important to understand that selections do take that time to be effective, and that it's a longer term part of your overall fly strike management strategy. Classing can be quicker than breeding. So taking out the susceptible animals within your flock this year and removing them can have an impact. Breeding to reduce susceptibility is going to take a little bit longer. So understanding the difference between classing and long-term breeding. Important to monitor your effectiveness and keep good records. And this is where the AWR ClassiFly workshop comes into to play. Really, really important, as I said right back at the beginning, then that the difference on your farm is you've got your sheep, your farm, your choice, your plan. What happens on your place is going to be very unique to your place, your system, your management, your calendar of operations, the type of sheep, the environment. There's all of those factors to think about when you're looking to reduce the overall susceptibility of those animals. Okay. I just want to really quickly touch on what you get and see, which is phenotype. Okay, so what animals you get is a product of the genetics that you breed and the environment and the non-genetic factors. Okay, that's something else that's really important when you're thinking about how to go about putting a plan together to reduce that susceptibility in the longer term. And again, remember, the different sheep suit different environments. Your sheep need to be fit for purpose. A good sheep on one farm may not be good for another, and vice versa. And your breeding objectives really important to your business in terms of where you are now and where you want to go. If you're breeding to do a whole lot of other things and reduce your fly strike susceptibility, you've got to think about how you're going to manage that and balance that. So in terms of what to do on farm, and again, the ClassiFly workshop covers this in a lot more detail. It's a full day workshop. It looks at benchmarking your flock starting position, classing you use for fly strike traits, selecting rams that suit your breeding objective and the environment in which you're operating, and monitoring and reviewing over time. And that's really important to be able to chart your success as well, and look at your progress towards reducing that overall susceptibility. Again, it comes back to that toolbox that we talked about earlier, and all of those different facets that are important in reducing the susceptibility. So in terms of on farm, some of the take-home messages that I just wanted to reiterate is that planning is really important, and an integrated fly strike plan is really essential in combating fly strike. So it's not one thing. Again, it comes back to that triangle that we talked about before. It's disrupting as much on either side of that triangle as you can to try and have a multifaceted approach. We can't just rely only on chemicals to reduce our animals' susceptibility and the impact of sheep blowfly on our place. We can't just rely on something else either. Can't rely on not having any flies. We've got to accept that there's a whole lot of ways that we can reduce our populations. We can use appropriate chemicals, and again, it's really important to think about your short term and your long term. So what short term tactics are you using this year? What are your long term strategies? And how do you continue with those? And certainly recognizing that different circumstances, different prevailing environments have a big impact on your capacity to implement some of those longer term strategies. So I guess in terms of getting along to a workshop, there's plenty of opportunity to attend workshops as they're rolled out across Australia with those networks. And you can think a bit about what you want to do in terms of that further learning and where you want to look at the plan and your calendars. Attend a SimpliFly, attend a ClassiFly. So these are all of the pieces in the AWI sheep blowfly extension suite. Its fly time is quite a tactical here and now. It's a suite of tools and resources available for seasonally relevant stuff in terms of, what you might need to know now, similar to what we're talking about at the present time. Demystify, that really seeks to unpack the resistance story and how to go about understanding a bit more about resistance. SimpliFly, that's the what to do this season workshop, whereby you'll look at management calendar, that triangle of where you can, disrupt the triangle to your best advantage. ClassiFly, that's the workshop, as I spoke about a little while ago, with regards to selecting and reducing the overall susceptibility of your sheep over time. And that moves into Stratifly and Amplify, which are more targeted at coaching situation where there'll be an accredited coach which will be assisting you work through towards non-mulesed, or working with the system that you have on your own place to reduce that susceptibility. So it's more in a guided type of fashion. So more information can be found at wool.com. This is what the flystrike extension program looks like, the little spot on the website looks like. Click on there and that'll unfold all of the tools that I've spoken about. Parabos, again, all of the tools. This is probably where you want to go to find the flystrike susceptibility tool. And again, Flyboss, same sort of scenario. So Fiona, that's all I've got in my presentation for today. I know it's been a huge amount, and I apologise for the volume of slides in today's presentation.
All good. Thank you, Megan. That was great. It's certainly not a topic that can be covered quickly. And just before I let you go, our next webinar, a bit of a save the date for you and watch our social media platforms for more information, will be on cattle parasite management on the 15th of November at 1 p.m. So we look forward to having you all join us again for another great webinar next month. So I haven't got any more information that's come through on the Q&A and the chat there, Megan. So I think we'll wrap up today's presentation and we'll see you all again next month. So thanks again for joining us. Bye for now.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.